Could a death list from across the ocean truly be manifesting among the greatest icons of the Chinese entertainment industry? As the death of Chen Duling in the shadows is exposed, and the screams from the soul of Yu Menglong suddenly become a haunting obsession, all eyes are turned toward Hu Ge, the man currently standing in the crosshairs of cruel, controlling forces. Could it be that his hollow gaze and emaciated physique are not due to work pressure, but are instead a final distress signal before being swallowed by a system operating in the dark? If you feel the chill behind this brilliance, a subscription or a like at this moment is how we together maintain our sanity to avoid being led astray by silence. Please share your thoughts in the comment section, because our collective voice is the final barrier protecting what remains of human values. At the end of 2025, while much of the world remained busy with familiar entertainment cycles, unexpected information appearing from outside China sent shockwaves through the international online community. An American psychic, during a live broadcast, claimed that Chen Duling, a figure closely connected to artistic circles, had passed away under circumstances that were never officially announced. This information, linked to a specific timeline and haunting details, quickly transcended the scope of a personal story. Attention did not stop at the name of Chen Duling. In the same chain of information, the name of Yu Menglong, a Chinese actor who had passed away previously, was brought back as a central figure. According to circulating accounts, messages allegedly coming from his soul continued to appear through spiritual communication sessions, describing a grim picture of detention, violence, and spaces hidden from public view. These accounts, though unverifiable by traditional journalistic methods, nonetheless created a powerful wave of discussion because they touched upon the deep-seated fears of modern society. What happens when power operates in the shadows? In this context, another name gradually emerged at the center of attention. Hu Ge, a famous actor born in 1982, who was once considered a symbol of stability and standards in the entertainment industry, began to be mentioned as a figure under extraordinary pressure. Recent images of him show a marked change in appearance and mental state. These changes, which could normally be explained by a grueling work schedule, were instead placed into a broader series of hypotheses regarding surveillance, control, and the restriction of personal freedom. What makes the story complex does not lie in whether that information is true or false, but in how it connects within the public mind. When official information channels remain silent, the information gap is quickly filled by speculation, analysis, and alternative narratives. In such an environment, every gesture and every silence of an artist can be interpreted as a signal. So what is truly happening behind these stories? Is this merely a coincidence of several individual factors, or is it a manifestation of a more sophisticated control mechanism directed at influential people? In this video, we will analyze each layer of information one by one, from the initial context and media reactions to the psychological impact on celebrities, to better understand how a crisis of perception is formed and spread in the digital age. The stories that began spreading from beyond China's borders did not appear in a vacuum. They formed in a specific context where trust in official information has been eroded over many years, and where the public has become increasingly familiar with seeking alternative explanations for events that remain unclarified. When an American psychic announced information about Chen Duling, what caught the attention of the online community was not just the content of the claim, but the geographical location and the power distance it represented. A voice coming from outside the system always provides a sense of being less controlled, even if the level of authenticity remains a major question mark. From a media perspective, the fact that this information was tied to specific timelines and symbolic details created a sense of urgency. Viewers did not have time to verify. They were swept into a continuous flow of information where each new detail seemed to confirm the previous one. In that environment, spiritual communication sessions and spirit boxes were not only perceived as activities colored by belief, but were also seen as a channel to speak for those whose voices had been cut off in the physical world. The public motive of those conveying this information is often described as a desire to warn and protect. According to their presentation, revealing what are alleged to be messages from the deceased is not intended to create panic, but to draw attention before similar tragedies continue to occur. This argument easily gains sympathy, especially in a context where stories of disappearances, detentions, or prolonged silences have previously appeared in collective memory. However, beneath that layer of public motive, more complex psychological factors exist. One of these is the need to find order in chaos. When tragic events occur without an official explanation, humans tend to connect them into a chain of cause and effect. Assigning individual stories to an underground system of power helps fear take a shape, even if that shape remains vague. Fearing an invisible but clearly structured force is sometimes easier to accept than facing randomness and uncertainty. In that chain of connection, the image of Huge is placed in a special position. Unlike figures who only appear through narration, Huge is a familiar face present before the public. Minor changes in his expression, gait, or the way he answers interviews are quickly magnified and interpreted. A furrowed brow can be seen as a sign of anxiety. A brief thank you can be understood as unusual reservation. In a context of lack of transparency, every detail is at risk of becoming speculative evidence. Here, it is necessary to distinguish between events and interpretations. Events are what can be observed: a dense promotional schedule, prolonged work pressure, and fatigue accumulated over time. Interpretation is how the public assigns meaning to those events. When an artist is placed into a narrative of surveillance and control, every normal expression can be redefined in a negative direction. This is a familiar psychological mechanism in media crises, where personal images are pulled into stories larger than themselves. Another factor to consider is the role of silence. In many cases, the silence of an artist or management company is seen as a safety strategy. However, in a context already steeped in suspicion, that silence becomes a catalyst for speculation. The public does not only ask why there is no explanation, but they also construct alternative explanations themselves. Every information gap opens a space for collective imagination. When analyzing the roots of this story, the impact of the digital environment cannot be ignored. Online platforms reward shocking content, strong emotions, and the ability to retain viewers. Stories told with a structure of warnings, revelations, and secrets often spread faster than cautious analyses. This does not mean everyone involved has bad motives, but it reflects how the system amplifies certain types of information. Ultimately, the core question does not lie in who is right or who is wrong, but in how these stories reflect the psychological state of society. When trust is eroded and when official information is insufficient to reassure, alternative stories will emerge to fill that void. Huge, in this case, becomes a convergence point for many anxieties rather than the source of them. So, in your opinion, what real fears of modern society do stories like this reflect? Are we worried about the fate of an individual, or about the feeling that anyone could be caught in a mechanism beyond their control? As the initial stories moved beyond the scope of small, sporadic live broadcasts, they quickly entered a new phase. This is the stage where social media communication began to operate according to its own logic, where the speed of transmission is just as important as the content, and where every individual becomes a link in the chain of information amplification. In a short time, clips, translations, and comments appeared densely across multiple platforms, creating a sense that something larger was unfolding, even if no one could yet point to its clear boundaries. The most noticeable immediate impact was the sudden surge in public discussion. Keywords related to Yu Menglong, Chen Duling, and Huge continuously appeared in trending topics. What was noteworthy was not the number of people who believed or disbelieved, but that both groups participated actively in the same discussion space. For the believers, every new detail was seen as a piece of the puzzle added to a pre-existing picture. For the skeptics, the very lack of verifiable evidence became a reason to warn about the dangers of over-inference. This division created two parallel but non-separate streams of opinion. One side emphasized the consistency of the stories told from various spiritual sources, arguing that the overlap in names, places, and timelines could not be mere coincidence. The other side questioned the reliability of the methods used to convey information, emphasizing that the lack of independent confirmation left all conclusions in a state of hypothesis. Both streams of opinion used the same dataset but arrived at different interpretations, reflecting how personal beliefs shape the reception of information. In that context, Huguet's image suffered a direct impact from the intense attention. The daily activities of a film promotion campaign, which were previously viewed as a familiar part of the job, were now scrutinized under a different light. Close-up photos and short videos capturing behind-the-scenes moments were analyzed in detail. The exhaustion on his face could be explained by a non-stop travel schedule, but it could also be interpreted as a sign of prolonged psychological pressure. Public spaces, from stages to media events, became places where every expression carried a meaning beyond itself. A crucial factor in this phase was the reaction, or lack thereof, from the management company. In many cases, remaining silent is viewed as a way to avoid complicating the situation further. However, in an environment already primed with suspicion, that silence was no longer neutral. It was interpreted in many directions, from a strategy to protect the artist to a sign of external pressure. In the absence of official information for comparison, every hypothesis had the opportunity to exist in parallel. Social media communication also contributed to blurring the boundary between observation and speculation. Personal comments, which only reflect subjective feelings, were cited and spread as emotional evidence. A person remarking that Huguet looked strange could quickly be shared thousands of times, creating the impression that this was a widely held observation. This effect made collective emotions more visible than reality and simultaneously increased the pressure on those involved. At a broader level, this peak media phase showed how a personal story can be swept into larger discourses of power and control. Allegations involving different organizations, corporations, or geographical regions were pieced together, forming a complex network of hypotheses. For many, placing fragmented events into a large structure provided a sense of understanding and control. For others, that very structure was the source of concern regarding the uncontrolled spread of unverified information. In this media vortex, what was easily forgotten was the psychological state of the individuals placed at the center of the story. Pressure came not only from work or public opinion, but also from being continuously observed and interpreted. Every public appearance was no longer merely a professional event, but became a test for a series of hypotheses that had been formed previously. This phase, therefore, was not only the peak of attention, but also the moment when the story began to move beyond the control of any individual. As the media and the public together participated in the process of interpretation, the story developed its own momentum, laying the foundation for the next turning points. At the climax, the story was no longer shaped by any single source of information. It became a self-propelling entity, nourished by collective emotion and the relentless repetition of hypotheses. Previous puzzle pieces, which were fragmented and difficult to connect, began to be placed side by side as if they inherently belonged to the same picture. It was at this precise moment that the boundary between reasonable concern and contagious fear became thinner than ever. The darkest moment emerged when the signs of control were interpreted as a permanent state. Being surveilled, restricted in speech, or restricted in movement, despite the lack of official confirmation, was described as a self-evident fact in many online discussions. In that context, the weight did not lie in the potential physical threat, but in the prolonged psychological pressure. An individual placed at the center of suspicion could feel exhaustion not just from work, but from continuously existing under the scrutinizing gaze of the public. This pressure was simmering. It did not manifest through dramatic events, but through the feeling of being surrounded by unanswered questions. Every public appearance became an ordeal where every gesture risked being misinterpreted. In those circumstances, silence was no longer a simple choice between speaking and not speaking, but a passive state where every action could be attributed to unwanted motives. The peak of the story did not come from a single event, but from the moment the collective consciousness shifted. When stories about entertainment, healthcare, biological research, and different geographical regions were spliced together, many began to see a pattern, even though that pattern still lacked independently verifiable evidence. This connection created a sense that there was an operational structure behind it, where power did not manifest directly, but through indirect elusive mechanisms. However, it was also here that an element of enlightenment appeared. Some voices began calling for caution, emphasizing the difference between suspicion and conclusion. They questioned whether fitting every phenomenon into a comprehensive system truly helped understanding, or if it only increased the sense of insecurity. These perspectives did not aim to deny the concerns, but to reestablish a necessary distance between emotion and analysis. Enlightenment did not take the form of a final solution. Instead, it appeared as a realization that not every information gap can be filled immediately. In the digital age, where information moves faster than the ability to verify it, accepting uncertainty is sometimes the only choice to avoid being swept into a vortex of inference. This does not diminish the value of the questions that have been raised, but serves as a reminder that each question needs to be kept in an open state until there is sufficient data. At a societal level, this phase reflected a deeper tension. It was the tension between the need to know and the capacity to know. When the public feels excluded from the process of understanding, they will create their own explanatory systems. These systems, despite lacking a verifiable basis, still hold powerful influence because they satisfy the psychological need for meaning and order. Ultimately, what remained was not a definitive conclusion, but a lingering question. That question points not only toward the fate of an artist or the authenticity of a series of allegations, but toward how society reacts to uncertainty. When fear and curiosity coexist, what will shape the collective perception, caution or inference? When the darkness of suspicion covers the greatest names, what remains is not just the obsession with a death list, but the fracturing of trust in what we have always seen. Huge, Yu Menglong, or Chen Duling, they are not just artists, but pieces in a power portrait full of hidden corners. Is that brilliant aura glory? Or is it actually a cage built of silence and invisible compromises? This story does not yet have a final page, and perhaps it is that very unfinished nature that serves as the most expensive warning about the price of fame in the digital age. When the boundary between protection and surveillance, between reputation and autonomy, becomes blurred, we are forced to ask, who is truly in control of the narrative? And where do we stand on the line between curiosity and human responsibility? Every prolonged silence is not just a choice, but a test of the empathy and judgment of an entire society. The future may bring new answers, or it may forever bury everything in the fog of systemic secrets. But regardless of the outcome, this journey has left a lesson etched into our hearts. Truth not only needs to be found, but it also needs to be approached with a compassionate heart and a sharp intellect. When the stage lights suddenly go out, what will be left to protect the human being behind the title of artist? The answer does not lie in any press release, but in the very way we choose to listen and react starting from this moment. Truth can only exist when we refuse to forget. Your subscription or like at this time is the way we together maintain our sanity, so as not to be swept away by waves of collective insecurity. Please share your perspective in the comment section, because your voice is the final barrier protecting the dignity of those who cannot yet speak for themselves.